In this video, we will learn about DNA. You will learn about DNA structure and function in all living things. First, it's important to know what DNA stands for. DNA stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. And DNA is located in the nucleus of eukaryotic cells. Now you might be thinking to yourself, where is DNA located in prokaryotic cells? And that is a great question because you know that prokaryotic cells do not have a nucleus. And in prokaryotic cells, DNA is free floating in the cytoplasm. However, in eukaryotic cells, like it says on the slide, that DNA is located in the nucleus. DNA is vitally important to all living things because it controls all of the processes that our cells go through. It, in fact, is the genetic code. It is the instructions for every process our body goes through. And very importantly, DNA controls cell division as well. So DNA has many functions that it performs within all living things. So as we said on the previous slide, DNA has that genetic information. DNA, or deoxyribonucleic acid, stores and transmits genetic information from one generation to the next. And that word transmit means passes on. So DNA is why you have the same eyes as your biological father or the same hair type as your biological mother. And so that DNA is the instructions that give us our blueprint for what we look like. So in this class, we've already talked about meiosis. And in meiosis, we talked about crossing over of chromosomes. And it's really important that you know that those chromosomes that we were talking about are made of DNA. In fact, in this picture, you can see that all chromosomes really are tightly wrapped DNA. Then it's wrapped around proteins, and then it's wrapped even more to form that X-like structure that we know as chromosomes. So chromosomes are just packaged in condensed DNA. I really like this picture because I think it really beautifully illustrates the way that DNA makes up chromosomes. Here we have our DNA. Then it becomes a double helix, which is the shape of our DNA. It gets wrapped around these proteins that are called histones, and then ultimately it forms this X shape. And as we learned previously, it is then housed in eukaryotic cells in that nucleus. Remember, in prokaryotic cells, DNA is free floating in the cytoplasm. So we've talked a little bit about the function of DNA, and I hope I've really emphasized how vitally important DNA is to all living things. If we did not have DNA, forget about it. We would not even have any living things. So now let's talk a little bit about the structure. And if you remember, the structure of something is what it looks like. So DNA is made up of kind of this ladder-like structure that's twisted. And that twisted ladder-like structure is called a double helix. And the sides of that ladder, so if we're looking at that, that would be like this dark gray part. Those sides of the ladder are made up of a phosphate and a deoxyribose sugar. Then those parts inside that are like the rungs or where you would step on the ladder, those are made up of nitrogenous bases. We have 4 nitrogenous bases. They're adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, or CGTA, which are the abbreviations for those nitrogenous bases. And those nitrogenous bases, the ordering of those 4 letters in infinite combinations is what provides the genetic code or genetic information that our body reads to create proteins that create what we look like. In figure A, you can see the twisted helix or the double helix. That dark blue part on the outside, remember, is made up of phosphates and a sugar, specifically deoxyribose sugar. Those stepstones in the middle, those are our nitrogenous bases. And remember, they're adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, or A, T, C, and G. So I want you to look at this picture B, And I want you to see, do you notice a pattern about the way that A, T, C, and G are connected? So go ahead and think for a second. What do you notice about this picture? Hopefully, when you looked at it, you noticed that A is always pairing with T, and C is always pairing with G. That is because adenine in DNA must always be paired with thymine, and cytosine must always be paired with guanine. Here in picture C, we see the interactions, the bonds that exist. So here there's some hydrogen bonds that hold this entire thing together. We're not really going to focus on those individual bonds, but you need to know that mostly hydrogen bonds are what hold our DNA structure together. So once again, here's another great picture. This pentagon-like shape, this is our sugar right here, right? That's a part of our backbone. Then this right here is our phosphate, of course. It has that P, which we know is a phosphate. So we literally see on the backbone, on the sides of the ladder, this repeating pattern: sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate, sugar, phosphate. And it repeats for the entire DNA structure. And then, once again in the middle, we see adenine and thymine paired together in DNA, and guanine and cytosine paired together as well. So like we saw in those pictures, adenine and thymine always pair together. And this, we really need to think of a creative way to remember that A and T always go together in DNA. It's vitally important. And so in just a few slides, I'm going to share with you some ways that you can remember that adenine, or A, always pairs with thymine. Once again, I'm going to remind you that cytosine, or C, always pairs with guanine. And now we're going to talk about how we're going to remember this. So some people like to say apples in the tree. That adenine right here, these cute little apples, are paired with this thymine that is in the tree. And then they say cytosine, which is car in the garage. So that's one way you could remember that A pairs with T and C pairs with G. Another way that you could remember this is that apples are tasty. Here's my A and my T pairing together, and that cookies are good. My C and my G pairing together. Yet another way, and this is how I remember it, is that the only combination of these four letters that spell a word is A and T. So I remember that at is spelled, A and T have to go together, adenine and thymine have to go together, and that A cannot go with any of the other letters, and nor can T, because ag, ac, and t aren't words. And so I remember this through at. I feel like that's the simplest way. But don't worry, I'm going to share some more fun ways if you still hate that way. This is our coolest, maybe, way. Some people remember that A pairs with T because the at-ats are the Imperial Walkers in Star Wars. And so they remember at, that is A pairs with T. They also remember that C pairs with G because they think crossguard lightsaber. Now, I don't watch a ton of Star Wars, so I'm not quite sure what that means, but it is one way that you could remember that A pairs with T and C pairs with G. You could also remember that they're always together because they're such a great couple. That A and T go together because they're a great couple, GC. So this is another way, yet again, that you could remember that A pairs with T and C pairs with G. So just as a reminder, we can say apples in the tree, cars in the garage, always together, great couple. At is the only word. We can have at-ats, and we can say apples are tasty and cookies are good. Whatever way you decide to remember this information, it is very important that you commit to memory that in DNA molecules, adenine is always matched with thymine, and guanine is always matched with cytosine. So as I said previously in this video, the way that those A's and T's and C's and G's are ordered is what determines our genetic makeup. So that order of A's, T's, C's, and G's is really important because that's what makes you, you, and makes some people's hair curly, some people's hair straight, some people's hair dark brown, some people's hair blonde. Just literally that different arrangement of those bases is what gives us all of our genetic diversity. So once again, when we're looking at the nucleotide, which remember a nucleotide is the monomer of DNA. And so as we look at a nucleotide, it is one phosphate, which you can see pictured here, with one deoxyribose sugar. Remember, those two form the backbone of the ladder, and then we have our nitrogenous base. So the three parts of a nucleotide are the phosphate, deoxyribose sugar, and the nitrogenous base. And as I said in the previous slide, nucleotides are the monomers of DNA. So now that you've watched this entire video, you should understand both the structure and function of DNA.